All right, my name is Opal Stanfield and I am in Bio 454 and I will be doing my presentation on the effects of plastic in the ocean. So I just wanted to start by talking about overall production of plastic. This is a very broad topic, so I'm just going to condense it down into things that I think are the most important. So plastic is an extremely versatile, durable, moisture resistant, and inexpensive product to make, which is why it's so mass produced. There are also some plastic additives like phthalates and bisphenol A that can leach out of weathered plastic, and they usually end up contaminating marine ecosystems, which I will talk a little bit more about later. There are tons of types of plastics because they can be custom made now, but I'm just going to stick with the three most common ones, which are polyethylene, polypropylene, and polystyrene. Polyethylene is used in garbage bags, film, shopping bags, bottle caps, bottles, and food trays. Polypropylene is used in straws, PVC pipes, doors, and window frames. And polystyrene is usually used in food containers, toys, packaging, and insulation. And again, these plastics can have many different forms, which is how they can be used for so many different things. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about some projections for global manufacturing of plastics. So in 1950, 1.5 million tons of plastic was manufactured globally. In 2008, 260 million tons of plastic. In 2012, 288 million tons. In 2014, 311 million tons. And by 2018, it was over 320 million tons of plastic. And of that 320 million, 40% of it was single-use packaging. And that was just for that year. And only about 9 to 10% of all this plastic is actually recycled. And the next thing I want to talk about was just some overall effects of plastic. So it is estimated that 8 million tons of trash get into the ocean each year, and 50% of it is single-use plastic. Nurdles are one of the most common type of microplastic. So naturally, 236 million nurdles washed up on Los Angeles and San Gabriel's River. This was from research done. Also, 70% of marine pollution actually sinks. So although people usually think that the pollution that's the worst is the stuff that floats, but it's the microplastics, it's the plastics that sink. It's also estimated that by 2025, the ratio of plastic to fish will be 1 to 3, and that's in terms of tons. So for every ton of fish, it will be 3 tons of plastic, and it's 2020, so we have 5 years until that. And then it's also estimated that by 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. And in 2018, it was estimated that 60% of the seafood humans consume actually contain plastics. And then a huge problem of plastics is something that's sort of, I guess, more recent is microplastics. So microplastics can be defined as any piece of plastic that is less than 5 millimeters, but it can be as small as 1 millimeter, and it can be as thin as a strand of hair. There are also two types of microplastics. There's primary microplastics that are actually engineered to be such a small size, and then there are secondary microplastics, which were once larger pieces of plastic that were broken down over time through environmental stressors such as sun, UV rays, rocks, you name it, just being in the ocean. And then microplastics can also come from a variety of different sources, and that includes cosmetics, synthetic clothing, and fishing gear. And so for the cosmetics, microbeads are often used in personal care products as an abrasive material. So that can be in face wash, that can be in toothpaste, that can be in a lot of different things. And then for every 11-pound load of laundry, it can give off as many as 6 million microfibers. And 60% of all clothes are actually made out of synthetic plastic fibers. And because most people don't really use a filter or anything for their clothes, usually these fibers end up directly going into the ocean. And then microplastics can also easily absorb other marine contaminants, which can become a huge problem. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then this is just some slides on some macroplastics on the left and some microplastics on the right, and a little bit of both in between. And so I also wanted to talk about macroplastics. So macroplastics are also a huge problem, and this is more of kind of what we see in, those videos of seals or turtles having, straws stuck in their nose, or soda can plastics around their necks that are choking them. But anyways, so turtles eat single-use plastic bags, as many of us probably already know, because they view them as jellyfish, which they look exactly like in the water. But bigger marine animals can become entangled in fishing gear and can drown or die of infection from the fishing gear actually cutting into their flesh. And these animals, more importantly, can actually die from starvation, because once they ingest these plastics, they don't come out of their system. And so they ingest them and they keep ingesting them, and eventually they have no room for food. And it can also cause intestinal backing, which can also lead to starvation and death. And then entanglement leads to thousands of deaths of marine mammals and sea turtles. And 90% of seabirds have actually ingested plastic debris. There's been a 67% decline in seabird populations from 1950 to 2010. So I wanted to continue and talk about how plastics are actually affecting the marine food web. So I don't have it in my slides, but it starts with little microalgae clinging to these floating pieces of plastic. And so once these microbes, as it says in the picture, colonize on this plastic piece, that is then ingested by zooplankton. And then those zooplankton are then ingested or eaten by other fish. And then that fish is eaten by another fish, and it just goes up and up the food chain. So it's kind of a conceptual idea in a way, but essentially these toxins and this plastic is just continuously moving up the food chain because it's being eaten at such a low level. And then also some marine organisms can actually pass these microplastics, but it really doesn't do anything, because then these microplastics can be consumed by bottom feeders that feed on mainly excrement. So even though these plastics can be digested and passed, they can still circulate through the food chain. So it's sort of like a never-ending type of thing. And also, it's not just the plastics that are getting cycled, it's also the toxins in the plastics. Next is the plastic affecting coral reefs, which obviously coral reefs are so important to the diversity of just the entire ocean in general. So fishing nets can actually get caught on reef heads and can tear away at the coral. Plastic makes coral more susceptible to diseases, from a 4% likelihood to an 89% likelihood. And this is because these plastic contain marine contaminants, and they contain toxins that are bad for the coral. And then staggerhorn coral and other types of branching coral are 8 times more likely to trap plastics within the reef. And then macroplastics can also cause shading, suffocation, and tissue abrasion to these corals, which just inhibits their growth, which just does not help anything. And then 52 tons of fishing gear was actually accumulated in the Hawaiian Islands conservation area each year. So next I wanted to talk a little bit about other ecosystems, including freshwater and deep sea. So for freshwater, rivers actually transport 70 to 80% of plastics that arrive in the ocean, and a huge source for this transportation is wastewater treatment plants, which transport microplastics into freshwater. And then there was a plant in Scotland that released around 65 million microplastics into fresh/brackish water every single day. And there's also been research done on other freshwater bodies, such as the Great Lakes. And there was 43,000 microplastics per 25 centimeter cubed found in these locations, so it's pretty small. And next, I wanted to talk about the Pacific Garbage Patch, just because it really relates to Hawaii. It's right next to us. So it was discovered by Charles Moore in 1997, and it's a concentration of marine debris caused by gyres, which are circular rotating ocean currents between Japan and the US. So the center of the gyre tends to be calm, causing an accumulation of this marine debris that actually become trapped in the gyre. And so it consists of the Pacific Garbage Patch actually consists of the Eastern Garbage Patch and the Western Garbage Patch. The Eastern Garbage Patch is between Hawaii and the US, and then the Western Garbage Patch is actually just the coast of Japan. So 80% of the pollution that's in the Pacific Garbage Patch is actually land-based and caused by littering or directly dumping garbage on the shoreline. And then the term garbage patch can kind of be misleading because people think it's sort of a raft, when in reality it's just a high concentration of marine debris. And also microplastics consisted of 8% of the marine debris mass, but it consisted of 94% of the floating debris. So even though these microplastics aren't heavy, they're very, very copious. And then also in a study done, there were 1.7 trillion pieces of microplastics and 3.2 million pieces of macroplastics within the Pacific Garbage Patch. And so next is just some pictures of the actual Pacific Garbage Patch. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit too about what ocean is most affected. So the North Pacific Gyre is one of the most affected, and it gets approximately 2 trillion pieces of plastic. The Indian Ocean is next with 1.3 trillion. The North Atlantic has 930 billion. The South Pacific has 491 billion pieces of plastic. The South Atlantic has 297 billion pieces of plastic, and the Mediterranean Sea has 247 pieces of plastic. And this on the side right here is just a map of the gyres. Lastly, I wanted to end on a little bit of a positive note of, okay, what can we do to stop this as consumers, as one person trying to make a change? So we can use biodegradable food containers, and then we can also bring our own takeout containers when we're eating out at restaurants, and then also just not purchasing any sort of single-use plastics helps a lot. Make sure to always recycle and compost, because that also helps as well. And then be a conscious consumer. Buy something keeping its end date in mind. So if you know that at the end of the day this is going straight to the landfill, maybe don't buy it. And then also maybe try to purchase clothing or mower clothing without synthetic fibers, or use a fiber catcher for your washing machine so that these fibers don't immediately just go into the ocean as soon as that load is done for. And then also just lastly, speak up. It's so important that we raise awareness on these issues, because a lot of people don't even really know that they're going on, and that includes people in the US today. So speak out on it whenever you can, and always try to encourage people to be more environmentally conscious. And lastly, this is just my 2 works cited slides. All right, thank you.